I really don't know how to introduce the next speaker. Actually, he's a massive contributor of lots and lots of projects. I was on his GitHub page yesterday, and he contributed to more than 477 repositories. He's a senior VP of Evil at CocoaPod. I mean, he was. And he is the creator of Xcode, which is likely not needed anymore. And this is probably one of the last talks he will be giving publicly, apart from WWDC, I guess, next year. And I'm talking, of course, of Boris.
Hi. Yeah, Simon already said everything about me that you need to know. And so we can jump right into talking about extending Xcode. I have one thing to say. So I work also at the moment at this company called Contentful, where we build the future of content management systems. We can't hear you. You can't, oh. Sorry. Yeah. Is that better? Yeah. All right. So let's go back one slide. Yeah, I work at this company called Contentful, where we build the future of content management systems. And if you want to know more, you can find me and get one of those coloring books after the talks. So once upon a time, we had Xcode plugins. Unfortunately, in Xcode 8, not anymore. Xcode is now under system integrity protection. That means it doesn't load any third-party code bundles anymore. And also, you can't code sign them with your own code signing profiles, because it will still not be loaded, because the Xcode only loads things that are signed by Apple at this point. So all the old plugins don't work anymore. But we got a new thing, which is Xcode source editor extensions. Okay, what are we going to talk about them? We're going to look at the Xcode Kit API. Xcode Kit is the framework that we use for building the source editor extensions. We're going to see how to build an extensions. We're going to look at some caveats, and we're also going to take a quick look at some open source extensions that are already on GitHub. At the moment, there's only a tiny API in Xcode Kit. So what we can basically do is we can add new menu items to the editor menu. They invoke an XCSOURCEEDITOR command. The command gets the contents of the current file, and the selection is input. And those commands are only available if a source file is open. The extension environment is it's a separate process using XPC to communicate with Xcode. But it can invoke the host app. So because it's an application extension, it actually needs a hosting app. And you can invoke some stuff in there from the extension. But you can't really do anything with Xcode except communicate back via the Xcode Kit API. So this is an example. So basically every XCSOURCEEDITOR command contains of one function, which is called perform. It gets some invocation, that is all the data, we're going to look at it later, and a completion handler. You do some work, and then you call the completion handler with an optional error. Okay, let's look at Xcode Kit. The invocation is the main thing that you get from Xcode, and we just saw it's passed into the perform command. It has this mouthful of a name, XCSOURCEEDITOR command invocation. And it has three properties. One is a buffer. We're going to see what that contains later. There's a cancellation handler. And that is if your extension takes longer than a few milliseconds, I think, a little banner comes up in the Xcode editor. And there will be a cancel button where the user can cancel your extension. For example, if it hangs or whatever happens, the user doesn't want to wait anymore. Because while your extension is running the perform function, the editing is actually locked for that file, so that the data that your extension has and the data that Xcode has don't get out of sync. And if the user presses the cancel button, the cancellation handler will be called. So that is where you can clean up and do things like this. The third thing you get is a command identifier. We get back to that later. Basically, each menu command has an identifier, and you can choose how to structure your extension. You can have a class for each command, or you can use the command identifier to have multiple commands in one class, and then distinguish by looking at this identifier. So the XCSource text buffer has a bunch of properties. It has a string, which is complete buffer. That is the whole content of the file. You get a content UTI, which is the file type. So for example, you can distinguish between Objective-C or Swift, things like that. You get the lines, which is an array of all the lines inside the complete buffer. It is can be faster to just look at the lines, or if you just want to append something or insert a line somewhere, it can be better to mutate this lines array than working with a complete buffer, depending on the file size. You also have a mutable array of selections. That is the selection the user has, or the insertion point of the cursor, and you can also mutate it. So you can also make extensions which change how you navigate. And the rest of the properties are about telling you how the users indented that file. If they're using tabs or spaces, what is the tab width, stuff like this. So you can, if you generate code, you can like match the indentation preference of the user. XCSource text range, that is the objects you have in the selection array that we just saw. So each selection of the user is a source text range. It has a start and an end, which is an XCSource text position. And the position has a column and a line. So this is how the selections are represented. And also, if you want to set new selections, this is how you create them. Yeah, the XCSource editor command protocol. This is the perform function we saw earlier. So you have each command needs an implementation of this protocol, and the perform function will be called when the user calls that command. There's also the XCSource editor extension protocol. This is kind of the principal class of the extension, and it allows you to do two things. One is you can do some work when the extension has launched the first time, and the other thing you can do, you can provide the command definitions. So command definitions basically tell Xcode which things to show in the editor menu, and there are two ways to provide them. One is this dynamic way via the XCSource editor extension class, where you can also react to things like configuration options of the user, they did in the app, or things like this. The other way is to do it in the info.plist statically. Yeah, and inside this, in the command definitions array, you have a set of you have a set of dictionaries, and each dictionary will use one of the XCSource editor command definition keys. Each command needs a class name. That is your implementation of the XCSource editor command protocol. It needs an identifier. That is the command identifier that we saw on the very first slide of Xcode Kit. That is passed into as context, which command the user invoked, and it gets a name. That is what's displayed in the UI in the editor menu. All right. Also, distribution of them. So everything needs to be signed. You have two ways to distribute an editor extension, which is first it's a Mac App Store, and the other way is using the developer signing. But actually, I haven't checked back. I gave the same talk like a week ago in Spain, and the day before this tweet was done, I think there are still no Xcode 8 extensions in the App Store, so nobody shipped anything real so far. Okay, let's look at a different new extension mechanism in Xcode 8, which is its extended AppleScript dictionary. So there's been an AppleScript dictionary for Xcode for a while, where you could basically look at the context of the user's currently open project. You can find out which file they have opened, things like that. Since Xcode 8, you can also remote control Xcode in some ways. You can run tests, you can run builds, and you get the logs back. So you are able to do some new things there. And basically, if you look at your extension and you also have the app, you could, inside the app, you could use AppleScript to get some additional information from Xcode. You cannot really use AppleScript in the extension itself because AppleScript only runs on the main thread of an NS application, really, or at least the NS AppleScript API that we're using here. So in the extension, it will not really work, but you can use it in your app to get information. And the API is relatively simple. You create an NS AppleScript object with your AppleScript source code, and the rest is basically error handling. There's an execute and return error function on it, and then you can handle some errors. But basically, it's 2 lines of code. And this is how an AppleScript could look like for finding out where the currently open workspace in Xcode is located on the file system. So you get the active workspace document, you get its file, and then of a file you can get the POSIX path, which is the actual path on the file system. And then you can use the run AppleScript function that we just saw on the previous slide. So this is a way to interact with Xcode and get some information that the source editor extension API doesn't give us. For example, you could do things like if your user opens the app the first time, you get the currently open project, and then you have that you can store that context somewhere in the data of your app, and then provide it to the extension, because the extension and your app can communicate. All right, let's do a demo and look at how we actually create an editor extension in real life. So we're going to create a new Xcode project. It's going to be a Cocoa application. So there's no editor extension project template. You just use a Cocoa application. I'm going to call it extension host. We don't need tests, of course. And let's put it on the desktop. So the next thing we have to do is probably actually too small to really see. I'm just going to say what I'm doing. So I'm adding a new target. There's a template here for a target, which is Xcode source editor extension. This also needs a name. And then we have the extension. And basically Xcode generates 2 subclasses. One is the XCSOURCEEDITOR extension, implements the XCSOURCEEDITOR extension protocol. This is where we can do some work after launching, and we can provide command definitions. In this case, we don't want to do either. And then we have a class that implements our actual command. And then we can do things like maybe we want to clear the user selection when we use our command. So we can use the invocation. It's buffer. It has the array of selections, and we say, let's remove all objects. This should work, right? And the completion handler is already being called. Oh, we can also look at the cancellation behavior. So if you actually don't call the completion handler, what happens? And basically, we're already done. Oh yeah, we can take a quick look at the info.plist, which is probably also not really visible, but basically Xcode creates an entry in the info.plist for our command by default. So we can change its name here to clear selection. All right, and now we can run it. So because this is an extension, Xcode asked us what app is the context we want to run it in. Of course, we want to run it in Xcode. And after it compiles, it will launch a second copy of Xcode. And this, to distinguish the two Xcodes, this Xcode will get this grayscale icon. So you always know which one is which. And we just open our own project. for now. And the other change is that we get this, in the HUD, we also have this grayscale background. So we can also see at the window that we are in the debug Xcode. And we can actually debug our extension here. So if we set a breakpoint and we invoke our extension, oh, it's actually not here. This is unfortunately a problem of the template in the Xcode GM. So what we have to do is to quit the extension, and we have to change code signing, of course. What else? And the issue is that ad hoc signed, so the default for Mac is doing ad hoc signing, and ad hoc signed extension is actually not loaded by Xcode since beta 5 or something. So we have to activate that ourselves. And since the app and the extension needs to have the same signing identity, we also need to activate code signing for our main app. Okay, run this again. And now we should actually get our menu item. So we can just open some source file. And now in the editor menu, we have our extension and we have our clear selection command. Now if we run it, we should hit our breakpoint. And what we see here is now that this HUD, which is saying the command clear selection is still busy, and the user can cancel it here. And while it's running, you can actually not do anything, but you can cancel, and then you can type again. So the user is always in control of the lifetime of your extension, you could say. All right, let's take the breakpoint out. Oh, actually, also quit. That one. Didn't want to do that. So let's run it again, because we will actually see something fun when we run this command. Let's make a selection, and our command should clear it. Oh, right. We are not calling the completion handler. Yeah, thank you. So we run it the third time. All right, third time's a charm, right? And let's do clear selection. And we see something funny. Xcode crashes. The issue is that the selections array can actually not be empty, otherwise Xcode will not like it. And there's actually a couple of issues like that you should avoid. I made a project called Crash, which you can find as part of the repo that contains the slides that I will tweet afterwards. And this shows you some things you shouldn't do at this point. One of them is like, do not clear the selection and don't set a new one. The other one is don't remove all the lines while the user has a selection. Clear it before. And the last one is complete buffer. Don't set it to empty. Also to some other things. We will see another plugin in a moment where I just do everything with lines. Basically, I wouldn't recommend touching complete buffer at this point, because there are some issues with it in certain contexts, and you don't really want to crash Xcode. That's kind of defeating the point of the extensions. Yeah, there are some things you just have to like find out, or you can look them up in my repo. So I just have two small tricks that I want to show here that help a little bit with development. And one is we can actually avoid having to always say Xcode when we launch our extension. We can just set it as the app that gets launched, and then we don't have to do it again. The other thing is you can also set arguments. That helps if you actually want to modify some source code. You can pass in the path to some file here. And then Xcode automatically opens this, so you don't have to navigate to a project or to a file each time you are running the extension. So that makes the turnaround time of making changes a lot faster. All right, now we can actually look at an extension I wrote, which is called Clang Formatter. And mostly it looks the same as the one we just saw, because most of it is boilerplate that Xcode generates for us. But we're going to look at our source edit command here. Well, yeah, one thing that does, it bundles a version of Clang format as part of the bundle. So Clang format is a tool that you can use to format Objective-C according to some rules. So you can have consistent code formatting. And there used to be a Clang format Xcode plugin. And this is one of the things we can actually re-implement as a source editor extension. And so we have this property to get the path of our Clang format binary that we ship with our extension. This function deals with how to run a command line process using Swift. It's fairly straightforward. We have pipes to communicate with it. We create a process. We set up our pipes as standard error and standard output. We set the launch path to the path of our command, and we pass in some arguments. We will see in a moment what we pass in there. And we also give to the function a string that is passed in as stdin. That will be just the file. And we create another pipe where we put in all the data from that string. And then we launch the task, wait until it exits, and then we read the error. We actually don't do anything with the error here. Could be better in that regard. But we also read standard out, where Clang format will print the newly formatted file. And then we return that. And we can use that function in our perform function to do the formatting. So we use the run function with our command pass that we just saw. We're going to use a specific style. In this case, it's the LLVM style. So Clang format comes with a couple of built-in styles. One of them is the LLVM. There's like 4 of them or something. And you can also create your own styles. That's not something the plugin allows at the moment, but in general, it's something that Clang format allows. And we pass in the complete buffer as the stdin. What we also do is we're going to check the content UTI to check if it's Objective-C source, because that's the only thing that Clang format really operates on. If you pass Swift in there, the output will not be pretty. And yeah, this is the way we can modify the whole file without running into issues with the complete buffer property, like crashes of Xcode. We just clear the lines array. We take our string, split it into lines, and then we add them as objects. And the other thing we have to do is we have to clear the selection, because if the selection becomes invalid, in some cases, Xcode might also crash. So to be safe, we're going to set a new selection. So we're going to clear the user selection, and the new selection will be just setting the insertion point at line 0, column 0. So to just set the insertion point and not to create a selection, we just pass in the same source text position as start and end. And then we create a range of it and add that to the selections. Yeah, and that's all we have to do. So now we can actually run this extension and look at what it does and if it works. Right, yeah. I have actually done what I just showed. I have passed in the file so that I don't have to select a new file here. And then we can mess up the indentation here a little bit in some way, because this is actually already formatted in the LLVM style, because I tested it before the talk and forgot to reset it. So now we have some different indentation, and now we can use Clang format to reformat it. Yeah, so it works. One thing we can also do, so you see that there's no shortcut at the moment. The user can set shortcuts for the commands in your source editor extension, but unfortunately there's no way to provide default shortcuts. So you always have to rely on the user doing that themselves. All right, so much for this. Now we can take a look back at the slides. Which also just tells us we should look at some existing extensions. I have one that I want to show because it does some interesting things with the host app. A way to find more extensions on GitHub is you can just search for XCSOURCEEDITOR command, and you will find a bunch of extensions. The last time I checked, there were like 40, some of them in different states, but there's like at least 10 or 20 which do things. So there's a bunch of stuff to try out. All right, and one we're going to look at now is called Xcode Way. This also used to be an Xcode plugin, and they re-implemented it as a source editor extension. And what this does is it basically gives you shortcuts to path on the file system. For example, the simulator directory, the derived data, so you can delete it, provisioning profiles, stuff like this. Yeah, for an extension like this, unfortunately, the caveat of you have to have a source file open comes into play, because if you look at the editor menu right now, the extension will not show up. It only shows up when a source file is open. So now that we have a Swift source file opened here, now it will show up. And one of the things it does is it opens the app and shows some UI there. For example, for its about dialog. That's not so exciting on itself, but it's just a demo of that you can actually invoke the app. So now we got an Xcode Way app, and it shows a dialog. So you can use this as a shortcut to guide your user to the app and let them do things there. For example, configure things. If you need like additional context, you could navigate them to the app, use AppleScript to find out, for example, the workspace that they're using or something like this, and then communicate it back to the extension. The main issue is the user will have to invoke the extension twice to actually make this work, but you could tell them inside the app. So that's kind of a workaround to do some things that are not possible in the extension. So what we will see if you do any of the other commands, like let's go to drive data, is that will actually not work. And the issue here is that extensions are also sandboxed. So something like Xcode Way will probably not work in the App Store. What we can do if we use developer signing is we can change the entitlements to give it the right entitlements for, yeah. I'm just going to navigate to the Xcode Way thing, because there I have a little diff for the entitlements. So basically what we can do is we can set this temporary exception files absolute path read only. That gives our extension the ability to read any file on the file system. Of course, App Store will not approve it, but it's something we can just do if we use developer signing or we do an open source extension. So I'm just going to apply this to the entitlements. I think I have to do a clean if I change this, and then we do run again. And now we can hopefully navigate to our derived data directory once the file is opened. And yes, now it works. So this is a way, this is something you can use if you distribute it only as open source, or you make your own extension, or you create one that is developer signed. You can use this to give your extension a little bit more privileges on the system. All right. Let's switch back to the slides. Yeah, I told you already how to find more extensions on GitHub. So the conclusion is we don't have any more plugins, which is kind of sad. But yeah, also the current extension API is quite limited, which is also sad. But we have some ways to get creative by using the app, by using AppleScript, or using additional entitlements to at least replicate some of the things that we could do before. And something that Apple engineers really encourage during WWDC is fire radars for new APIs that you want to see for extensions, because then they might get considered. If you don't, they won't. Thank you.
Thank you. You can come. So, we don't have much time for questions, but there are a couple I'd like to ask you. So this kind of reminds me of the golden age of TextMate. You know, where they just added a few entry points to the editor, and then a whole community started to implement things. Do you think it's going to happen that way?
Probably not with the API that we have right now, because it's just too limited. And you can do some things, but I was originally thinking, okay, maybe what helps is that you can actually sell them now in the App Store, so people would try to do that, but it seems not to have happened yet.
Yeah.
Maybe it still will. I mean, there's a bunch of activity on GitHub. We have like 20 extensions or something. That's not bad, I think, for how limited it actually is.
Yeah.
But I don't think it will be like a bigger community than the plugins already were. Some people will use it.
Why? Because, I mean, when it was just Alcatraz and like non-documented plugins, we already had quite a lot of plugins. And now that it's becoming official, if we have like some missing tools, then why not?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, it depends a lot, I think, on which APIs will be added, like, and if how much Apple will improve.
So which one first we would need?
I don't know. There's a lot of things. I mean, one thing to start would be to actually be able to choose. If I can have one, I would say like be able to choose where the menu items go and have them like independently from the source file, because then you can actually like at least make plugins that are not limited to the source editor.
Yeah, makes sense.
I mean, it's a stupid question, but why do you think Apple did that? I mean, it's just for safety or security reasons, or because they don't look like they are really believing into this stuff. I mean, Xcode support. I mean, it's not on the App Store yet. It's been already 3-4 months. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all know that there were like a couple of things in the press about how Xcode, like modified versions of Xcode being around.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
And I guess this influenced it a lot, I'm thinking.
Yeah. All right. So I guess it's all for now. We are running a bit late. So Boris is going to be here tomorrow. Can you confirm that? So if you have more questions, you can ask them tomorrow afternoon.
And it's, again, thank you very much, Boris.